Physical integrity describes the way that historic properties illustrate significant aspects of the past. Integrity is a critically important qualification for historic status. Eligible properties must retain materials, design features, and other physical qualities that accurately represent the period of significance. Eligible properties can sustain some loss to integrity so long as the sense of time and place is both evident and authentic. If they lose too much integrity, properties become ineligible. There is no precise way to identify that tipping point. Instead, we consider established standards, guidelines, characteristics, and aspects to consider integrity. Let's return to that image of the Jenga tower. The tower of historic status is built upon a foundation, which is the property's physical description. Undertakings that physically alter an eligible property may undermine or destroy the fundamental elements that provide a connection between the place and its history. That said, most eligible properties have some features that are historically significant and others that are insignificant. We can add, remove, or replace a few Jenga blocks without toppling the tower. In fact, some changes actually improve integrity and may help strengthen the connection between a place and its historical significance. An undertaking might have an adverse effect if it alters historic materials and features. An undertaking might have no adverse effect if it alters insignificant materials and features or alters historic materials or features to improve their condition or accommodate a new, compatible use. We recommend that you use the National Register framework to understand integrity and to identify historic features for a specific historic property. We further recommend that you use the Secretary of the Interior's standards and guidelines to plan projects that affect historic properties and to assess proposed undertakings and effects. Preservationists use character-defining features to define integrity for each specific property. Every old property is unique, which is why we write a property description, historic context, statement of significance, and determination of eligibility for each property. Those pieces that support a determination of eligibility also include information about character-defining features. Character refers to all those visual aspects and physical features that contribute to the appearance of any historic property. If you know why a property is eligible, the character-defining features are those features that relate from the period of significance and illustrate the significant aspects of its history. Character-defining features may include the overall shape of the building, its materials, craftsmanship, decorative details, interior spaces and features, as well as the various aspects of its site and environment. Please refer to the National Park Service's preservation brief about architectural character for more information about identifying these characteristics. For more specific information about the property that you're working with, try to find a relevant determination of eligibility or evaluation guide. For example, a historic context and evaluation guide to administrative architecture in Region 4 provides a detailed definition of characteristics that you could look for to assess effect. The report states that most administrative sites, quote, respond to the natural environment. Specifically, quote, rural administrative sites are typically located near a water source, which could be a river, perennial stream, or simply a spring. Administrative sites in towns are often located in residential or light commercial areas. Lookouts are characterized by their locations on peaks with dramatic views and steep topography. The report also states that most administrative buildings in Region 4 are, quote, 1 story, although some houses and warehouses are 1 1/2 stories. Administrative facilities with 2 stories or more are rare. Furthermore, quote, the most common siding for light frame administrative structures is shiplap with a novelty or rustic profile and corner boards. Log siding is also typical, particularly in areas with conifer trees. Board and batten siding often indicates the earliest administrative facilities or CCC buildings. Each of these descriptions could help you recognize how physical details of a single property fit within broad patterns and relate to the historic period. Character-defining features vary in size, shape, and meaning. They can be as big as an urban setting or as small as a shiplap profile. Preservationists use the 7 aspects of integrity to consider integrity. Eligible properties should retain integrity in most, or ideally all, 7 aspects: location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. Location is the place where the historic property was constructed or the place where the historic event occurred. Design is the combination of elements that create the form, plan, space, structure, and style of a property. Setting refers to the environment surrounding the property. Material refers to the fabric or literal materials that form the property. Workmanship refers to the hands, tools, and techniques that shaped the property. Feeling refers to a connection with the period of significance. Association refers to a connection with the significant historic event or person. Feeling and association strongly depend on individual perceptions, but they are perhaps the most useful aspects that describe the experiential value of a historic property. Please refer to the National Register bulletins for more information about these characters and their definitions. As you plan projects and assess effects, use the 7 aspects to clearly identify and describe the way in which an action might harm or help integrity. These aspects can also help you resolve effects. Please note that the condition is not an aspect of integrity. Condition means a relative state of repair or disrepair. Condition is certainly related to integrity, but it's important to understand the difference as you assess effects and plan projects. Historic features and materials can sustain damage without impacting integrity. This is true right up to the point when historic features and materials collapse or disappear. At that point, poor condition can harm some aspects, most often design, feeling, and association. To that end, you can improve integrity of design, feeling, and association by maintaining and repairing historic properties. Repairs have the potential to harm the aspects of materials and workmanship, so plan carefully. We recommend that you use the Secretary of the Interior's standards and guidelines. The Secretary of the Interior recognizes the following 4 preservation treatment options when preserving historic structures: preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. These 4 options are defined in 2 documents called the Secretary of the Interior's Standards and Guidelines. The standards are a series of short statements or principles about maintaining, repairing, and replacing historic materials, as well as designing new additions or making alterations. The standards tell us where we are going, and they identify essential steps that we should take. The standards provide a shared language and protect against short-term thinking. They encourage a long view so that we hand off historic properties for the next generation. The guidelines offer more detailed examples about how to apply the standards in specific situations. They delve into detailed recommendations for specific property types, materials, construction methods, and projects. Fundamentally, the guidelines also allow practitioners to develop and share best practices without rewriting the standards. Together, the standards and guidelines provide a framework for decision-making about proposed changes to any historic property. These documents are in place to ensure that properties are maintained and used with protections for their physical integrity. Preservationists use the Secretary of the Interior's standards and guidelines to design treatment plans for historic properties. Likewise, you can use the standards to evaluate the effect of a proposed undertaking. Start by asking which standard applies. When you review a project proposed by someone who uses the standards, such as a qualified contractor, their report should clearly state that the project is either preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, or reconstruction. Good maintenance and treatment plans adhere to one clearly stated set of standards. When you review a project that does not already reference the standards, start by asking the contractor to clarify their plan or make the determination yourself. Let's delve into those 4 options. The standards for preservation are akin to the practice called leave no trace. Preservation is the process of applying measures necessary to sustain the existing form, integrity, and materials of a historic property. Work generally focuses upon ongoing maintenance and repair of historic materials and features, rather than extensive replacement and new construction. The standards for rehabilitation facilitate the practice also called adaptive reuse. Rehabilitation is the process of returning a property to a state of utility through repair or alteration, which puts the structure to use while preserving the features of the property which are significant to its history. The standards for restoration are akin to rewinding a clock, taking the property back in time. Restoration is the process of accurately depicting the form, features, and character of a property as it appeared at a period in time. This is done by removing features from other periods in its history and reconstructing missing features from the restoration period. The standards for reconstruction facilitate a faithful replica. Reconstruction is the process of depicting by means of new construction the form, features, and detailings of a non-surviving site for the purpose of replicating its appearance at a specific point of time. Preservation and rehabilitation are relatively common on the national forests. If you are planning a project that will affect a historic property without harming integrity, it's probably preservation, which includes in-kind maintenance, or rehabilitation, which includes a new use. Restoration and reconstruction are relatively rare on the national forests. These standards are typically relevant in museums or other interpretive settings. The standards for rehabilitation are highly relevant to the Forest Service. The agency is working to address facilities that are underutilized and/or unmaintained. Some historic properties are destroyed. Others are disposed through sale, exchange, or long-term leases. Others may transition into a new program, such as recreation or administration. These changes are not necessarily alarming from a preservation perspective. In a sense, the agency is responding to concerns that have shaped preservation policies in the private sector for decades. The Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation are a tool that lends resiliency to historic properties that could be replaced to make room for new construction. There are plenty of good reasons to let historic properties evolve. They are useful economic assets. They are a form of embodied energy if recycled rather than replaced. When people continue to use properties, they remain relevant and alive, for lack of a better term. Occupied buildings are easier to maintain. Adaptation allows us to preserve more material in the broad scheme of things, meaning that we don't just preserve the best of the best in a museum-like state. The ethics of rehabilitation is that historic places do not need to be frozen in time. Historic preservation should be a practical tool that is compatible with other values or priorities. These are the standards for rehabilitation. A property shall be used for its historic purpose or be placed in a new use that requires minimal change to the defining characteristics of the building and its site and environment. The historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alterations of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. Each property shall be recognized as a physical record of its time, place, and use. Changes that create a false sense of historical development, such as adding conjectural features or architectural elements from other buildings, shall not be undertaken. Most properties change over time. Those changes that have acquired historic significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. Distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques or examples of craftsmanship that characterize a historic property shall be preserved. Deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. Where the severity of deterioration requires replacement of a distinctive feature, the new feature shall match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. Replacement of missing features shall be substantiated by documentary, physical, or pictorial evidence. Chemical or physical treatments, such as sandblasting that cause damage to historic materials, shall not be used. The surface cleaning of structures, if appropriate, shall be undertaken using the gentlest means possible. Significant archaeological resources affected by a project shall be protected and preserved. If such resources must be disturbed, mitigation measures shall be undertaken. New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. New additions or adjacent or related new construction shall be undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. As you know, Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act provides a set of procedures to ensure that federal agencies account for the effects of their undertakings on historic properties. Ideally, Section 106 helps us identify potential conflicts and then avoid, resolve, or mitigate their impacts. When you review an undertaking that may affect a historic property, consider how the proposed action may impact any of the property's specific character-defining features. If the action only impacts insignificant features, there is no adverse effect. For instance, if the property in question is a historic guard station compound developed in the 1930s, it may be appropriate to remodel a utilitarian garage built in 1965. This will not harm the character-defining features that provide a connection to administrative history and architecture of the 1930s. If the action will impact significant features, then there may be an adverse effect. However, the change may also be appropriate within the Secretary of the Interior's standards and guidelines. Identify the standard that applies to this project. For instance, if the property in question is a guard station compound developed in the 1930s, it may be inappropriate to remodel a garage that dates from the same era, this period of significance. However, if the purpose of the project is to turn the garage into a recreation center or a seasonal bunkhouse, the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation will apply. Under the standards for rehabilitation, the agency can replace some original materials and make some modifications to accommodate the new use. This would not cause adverse effects. If the changes are not appropriate within the Secretary of the Interior's standards, you probably have an adverse effect. You can also use the standards and guidelines to design alternatives and resolve adverse effects. We recommend that you identify the specific character-defining features and aspects of integrity that are adversely affected. Turn to the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines to develop an alternative treatment. In the example above, you could propose to remodel the garage in a way that retains the characteristic garage doors, roofline, wall logs, and wood windows. You could demonstrate that it is appropriate to replace non-historic finishes on the interior and install a new interior wall. The resources outlined in this lesson can help you plan proactive preservation projects that retain the integrity of any historic property. You can apply the same principles to assess and resolve adverse effects. As a final note, we recommend that you find out which undertakings are already addressed in a standing programmatic agreement. Currently, there is no single resource that lists all of the Forest Service's heritage agreements. Nonetheless, they are practical resources that could save time. This is a good occasion to consult with your colleagues within the forest, the region, the SHPO, or the ACHP. Good luck!